So I think, why don't we go on to Debbie Brock? Debbie, are you got the right buttons to press?
Yeah, exactly. Let's see if that is the case. That is for sure. So thank you all for having me at this session. I think for us, there's a lot of opportunities to discuss the systems change that's happening within social entrepreneurship education, but also the systems change that's happening with our social entrepreneurs. And I wanted to give kind of a brief introduction to Catalyst 2030, because I think it provides kind of a framework and a starting point for what we're going to discuss today with systems education. With Catalyst 2030, when it first started after the World Economic Forum was launched then in 2020, which was right before COVID, I think the timing is very noteworthy, because I think a lot of people are quite got more engaged because it was the COVID times with everything, and it did make a difference. But these 90 social entrepreneurs came together and they wanted to showcase, to say, this is built by social entrepreneurs for social entrepreneurs. And it was Skoll awardees, Schwab, Ashoka, Echoing Green, etc. So in our work, obviously, the preface for this was that there's key challenges that are affecting social entrepreneurs. And part of that is the lack of resources, obviously, that's being supported for them. The collaboration and the siloed mentality. So we tend to work in our own silos, and that's obviously the case with academia as well. The disconnect between the funding models, what we need for funding and what's available, and ultimately the lack of voices and decision-making that's available to us as social entrepreneurs. And we know that from the Social Progress Index, the SDGs will be achieved until 2092. It's probably even later. I bring up the Daniela Meadows quote because me personally, it makes me go back to the why. And the part about her quote when she talks about, no one wants these systems problems to progress. No one, wants them to continue. It's not until we reclaim our intuition, stop casting blame, see the system as the source of its own problems, and find the courage to restructure it. And that's what Catalyst 2030 is trying to accomplish in our work with social entrepreneurs, is to restructure the system and to address the system's problems. In our work with Catalyst, there's kind of 4 points here. And I think the collaborations of systems change is the key, because obviously we're trying to shift the dynamics, the structures, the infrastructures, the customs, power mindsets. There's a lot of work we're doing with the power mindsets. How do we shift the power to those at the local level and supporting that? And I think to really do transformative work, we have to be able to get the voices of the people that are doing this important work. And that mindset shift of those of us that might be coming from the global north, or we have our own perspectives, that to allow this shift to be this bottom up activity. The collaborations across all the different actors is that it's the social entrepreneurs working with the community members, working with the governments, working with private sector, obviously with donors hand in hand. And obviously, at the end of the day, we want to achieve this lasting impact of societal change at the local, national, and international level. And my work obviously has to do with facilitating systems change in that role. There's one last slide that I want to show, and then I want to talk about our work in education. But I really like this from a teaching perspective when you're working with students, is that it wasn't until I got involved with Catalyst that I saw things with a very different lens because of the social entrepreneurs that we're working with. And we typically, we see the system around us, but first we kind of have to go and look at ourselves and our belief within ourselves. So what's our personal beliefs, behavioral changes? And I think that's an individual experience that each of us has to address and has to look at from our own lenses, but then look at it from the lens of someone else. So this cultural change is shifting the dominant culture. The systems to change, so the core system that we're trying to change. And that, again, when I'm going to, I remember Ashoka talked about 54% of their Ashoka fellows were impacting at a policy level, that they were affecting government policies. So we need to do that in our work, because we can't transform the system without transforming the levers that are going to affect those and making those ecosystems. but the systems around you, whether that's a local level, community level, regional level, national, international. And so when I think about transforming systems, I have to start with the young people, with linking to self. And I bring that up because our work that we just are working on a research paper, and our work itself, what we realized was the linkage to self is the piece that we were missing. So we are seeing much more courses that are actually engaging social entrepreneurship and systems, and actually addressing systems in the courses, even if you were only able to offer one. But the inner development, and maybe the inner development goals, is the piece that we're not starting with. And if you look at the educators that are in this space that are truly committed, I think we spend a lot more time with the students and their inner development, and so helping them to achieve that. We'll go into more depth on that as we go into our conversation, but I did want to kind of start off with a little bit about Catalyst, and then we'll go into our Q&A and talk more about the work that we're doing in education. So probably off to you now, Jane.
Thanks. Now, I did have a few little technical issues, so sadly I might have missed some of what you said.
No worries.
So yeah, I look forward to coming back to that. Now, you're seeing my screen as, how's that? Better? Yeah,
Yep.
Thank you. Cool. So thank you, Bruce, for the introduction, and Debbie and Marilyn, it's just a delight to be here with you. And I really look forward to the conversation later. And audience members, thanks for being here. I'm sure that you also have as much to offer as any of us. My name is Jane Bryant. Hang on, let me just do this. So my name is Jane Bryant. This is the one. I'm just going to share it with this because this is where we're at right now. So Education for Sustainability Leadership, Supporting and Empowering Agents for Sustainability Transformations. That is my PhD title. That is what kind of leads me to be here. I am currently the co-director of the Masters in Strategic Leadership Towards Sustainability program at Blackinger Institute of Technology. And I'm having all kinds of technical issues today, so I think that's quite ironic. So my name is Jane Bryant, as I said. I come from Wajak Noongar Boodja, which is also known as Perth, Western Australia, to a lot of people. And it's my love for and frustration with this place that led me to Sweden to learn what I could about this thing called sustainability. So in 2007, looking at what I might study, I saw this and I got goosebumps and I got little tears in my eyes. And I thought, yes, that's my future. So it was something about the guy leaping across a green field in a blue sky, which I really needed at that point in my life. And the question, of reaching sustainability is not if we will have enough energy, food, other tangible resources, those we have. The question is, will there be enough leaders in time? And there was something about the hope and the agency of that question that I really liked. So in this very short, brief talk, I'm going to give you two different learning experiences. One is the Masters in Strategic Leadership Towards Sustainability, or the MSLS program, and the other one is a creativity project. Both different, but both quite interesting, I think, in building sustainability leadership. So the first one, MSLS. The vision for MSLS is it's a 10-month transformational program that focuses on advancing knowledge, skills and global networks in order to build capacity of graduates to be strategic leaders in the co-creation of thriving, sustainable societies. And as MSLSs, we are visionary, passionate, and systems thinkers. We work strategically and collaboratively and are solutions focused. What is MSLS? It's 10 months, it's full time. It's in a magnificently beautiful natural environment. It's on an archipelago in Sweden. It's in a Karlskrona, which is a very small town, and it's in person, and it's only in person. You must move across the world or to the next city to study it if you don't live in Karlskrona. We have generally 50 students from all around the world and from diverse backgrounds, all different backgrounds, from professionally different, interdisciplinary backgrounds, age difference, cultural difference. It's fascinating. At MSLS, we believe that learning is a lifelong process. In the 21st century, it's about skills and capacities and not just content. should be self-directed, and learners are ultimately responsible for their own learning. It's co-creative, it's not consumptive. It's about respect, safety, challenging, prototyping, feedback. It's more about making sense than memorizing. And it's a social endeavor, best done in dialogue with a diversity of perspectives. For me, this was a transformational experience. I did it 2008, 2009, and it changed my world. The opportunity to come back and teach on the program and do my research connected to transformational learning for sustainability leadership, was an amazing opportunity. So one of the first studies we did was looking at, is MSLS transformational? It was for me, but is it for others? And if so, what makes it so? 91% said yes, it was. Quotes like, it changed me permanently, like the red pill from the Matrix, just can't go back. Or I learned so much more about myself, who I am and want to be in the world, what my personal connection is to the work that I'm doing. I can see and feel that I'm a different person than the one I was before coming to MSLS. What is it about MSLS that makes it transformational? This was the question that I was really interested in. Is it the concepts and the content? Is it what we teach? That's part of it. Pedagogies. Is it the fact that it's peer learning, a lot of reflective learning? Is it self-directed learning? Is it the fact that there's a lot of group work and that people have to be with these diverse perspectives, every day on an island for 10 months? Is it the social fabric, the community? Is it the shared values, the trust and the safe space? Is it the diversity in the room? Is it the staff that hold? Is it the place, the fact that it's, surrounded by nature, it's in a small town, it's in Sweden? All of these things are what people said was a part of creating a transformational learning experience for them. Disorientation, the fact that everyone has to move their lives to this small town in Sweden for 10 months to do it. That's disorienting. That's also a key component of transformational learning. So that came up for lots of people, as well as the fact that it's hopeful and empowering. I think what made it quite unique, though, was the fact that it was the integration and synergy of all of these things within the MSLS program that made it transformational. I'm moving very quickly. The learning experience, too, is a creativity in action project. This is very different. So MSLS is 10 months intensive. Same cohort within a boundary. This was a creativity in action project, which was one project within a larger year-long program, 2 2-hour online sessions on creativity content put on the web so people could do it in their own time. We offered one-on-one coaching sessions occasionally. There was an exhibition space online where students could share their creativity project. And there was a large exhibition showcase online event where everyone shared what they did and talked about what they learned through the project. Grading was pass-fail, individual, small group. Tiny little assignment that sat within a larger program. Things that we asked for: use a unique and creative method to enact change for sustainability. We invite you to play, learn, dance, prototype, paint, sing, or just take inspiration from these artistic practices to enact change in a way that's unique, novel, and thus untried thus far for you. The goal is to stretch yourself towards new ways of thinking, being, and doing, rather than producing an intervention or creative work of the utmost quality, beauty, or success. And what the students did was magnificent. This was one project in Barcelona by Carlota Cataldi, We Can All Be Hummingbirds. So it was a neighborhood engagement, envisioning installation where she invited her neighbors to dream into what they could do for a more sustainable future. Another new mother, Sophie Villok, new life to old clothes. She took all her old clothes and made some new clothes for her coming baby. Elisa Janik created a 1, 2, 3 year for sustainability children's book, and she co-created this with her children. And then everyone talked about what they learned and the process of doing this. Key learnings that students said: the value of artistic and creative expression to communicate sustainability. People talked about the empowerment of being embodied and creating something concrete in the world. People talked about the challenge of expanding their comfort zones and the courage that that requires. And people talked about what they learned from creative thinking, the revelation of how many creative ways sustainability issues can be tackled. And just a couple of concluding take-homes on the creativity project. Creativity and sustainability are essential for global and individual well-being. The future of higher education requires educators across all disciplines to develop capacity in teaching sustainability. This is a really simple creativity assignment It's a valuable pedagogy that could be used in many fields and many disciplines. And as a teacher, even if you're not identifying or feeling creative yourself, you could do it. And another, Bildung, self-authorship and adult development. We do not have time to go to there. The invitation I'm going to leave you with at the end, I can put it in the link, is if you are interested in learning more, I have my PhD public lecture in defense on the 31st of August, where I can go into a lot more detail. How did it go? Was it like 10 minutes?
I love the introduction to your PhD dissertation, defense. It's great.
I think she passes. All hands up. We'll vote on it now. Get it over with. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Jane. That's fantastic. So unfortunately, we do not have breakout capacities in webinars. We are in a process of discovering the capacities of the Hoover system, and we've just discovered one of its incapacities. So, so I want to find a way to engage everyone who's here. So I think what I'll suggest is that as a start, why don't we, I can see there's a poll for those of you who have access to the Hoover app. For those of you who don't, you won't see this poll. That indicates there's a high level of experience and expertise in systems education in the room, which is fantastic. So I would encourage, if you have access to the chat, which you will if you're in the Hoover app, to place some questions and ideas that you would like the panel to address in chat. And we'll start a conversation now, so no rush. But as those ideas occur to you, place them in chat. I will experiment whether we can get individual participants live on the screen. But if we can't, we'll still have your ideas in chat and we can work with them from there. So please go ahead and do that whenever it could be an idea, it could be an observation, it could be a question, it doesn't have to be a question per se. Just whatever you'd like to contribute to the conversation. Could be some element of your experience. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for some ideas to accumulate in our chat, why don't we start in on our conversation? So I have a few prompts. You know, when I think about why we invited you three to serve on this panel, I think it's because systems education is such a huge and amorphous field. It doesn't take place only in formal institutions. It takes place in professional settings. It takes place at elementary school levels. It takes place at all ages and in just in the general population, as well as in for specialty applications. It's sort of like that conventional trope all of our systems educators use about the blind man and the elephant, right? Depends on where you put your hand. Is it the trunk? Is it a hose? Is it a rope? Is it the tail? Etc. And I think of you three as having very different sort of points of access and points of entry into this field. But all of you are doing what you might call field development, in the sense that Jane, your PhD, of course, is sort of a look at systems education pedagogies and programs. And Debbie, when I think of your work, you're organizing a network of systems educators with a focus on social entrepreneurship, as I understand it, to develop the sort of collective capacity of the field. And Marilyn, so many of your amazing projects have been on transformative learning and how this is applied in practice, and what can we do specifically to bring these ideas into practice to communities. What are methodologies we're using during COVID? How do we engage in transformative learning activities remotely? This track skills project that you just finished, you're just a fire hose of ideas and synthesis in the field. So I'm trying to look for some ways to connect you three, and I guess I would ask a question, which is, do we see a field here? Is systems education writ large a field? Are there some basic commonalities that characterize it? And what would you say they were? What are the fundamentals of systems education that we can identify that give it form and shape as a field, as opposed to being a set of discrete activities occurring in different domains of practice? And Jane, since you are working on your PhD, that kind of question I think is perhaps best suited to think of this as a dissertation defense question.
Thanks, Bruce. That's great.
And you could start in on it, and maybe we can see how we can chew on it and evolve that question.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think the first thing that came to me is in systems education and the field that I see, there's often it's like there's these two parts. There's the agent system, agent structure, the system we're trying to change, yet at the same time within systems education, there seems to be a real role and responsibility of the individual agent, of myself within the system. I would see that that's a key point that I see within systems education, both in the higher education sector, but outside as well. A lot of this, there's this responsibility of changing the system, in a sense, through also responsibility of changing self. So I think that's the first thing that comes to my mind as a distinct feature of this particular field of education. You don't go into a medical degree and have someone say, okay, you're gonna work on how you understand yourself in the world in order to do your work, do your profession. Whereas I do think that that's a distinct quality of our field. Would love to hear what you think of that.
Yeah, Marilyn, does that connect with your work on track skills and other topics?
Well, actually, I was sitting here thinking of a different topic, which, related to your question. I worked, as I said, for a long time with Warren Ziegler, the futurist, and he developed a lot of methods based, as he said, they are just, typical modest, they are just modern adaptations of Taoism. Okay. But one thing that is absolutely central to his methodology and to mine after all these years is the concept that you can learn to listen in a different way. And I use this no matter whether I'm teaching in a university or I'm teaching in a load of activists or even school children or whatever. I at least above a certain age, I teach deep listening, and that means deep listening to you, and it means deep listening to myself. And to me, it's an absolutely key question to all education for sustainability. We all need to become better listeners, and there are many different methods. Active listening is good, reflective listening is good, but the one that we all need is deep listening. Yeah, that would be my spontaneous response to your question, rather than responding to Jane. Sorry about that.
And I think for me, kind of a state of the field is that it's growing, it's grabbing so much awareness and traction that it's not coming out of one school like sustainability. It's being adapted and changed at different fields of study, and that we're seeing this growth and more awareness being built. I do agree with you, Marilyn, about being able to have that deep listening. I would add in there like the empathy and seeing myself in the shoes of someone else. If you don't have the ethical foundation and the values, obviously you're probably not going to do this important work. But the other side of this, being able to do this, is I have to do it in collaboration with others, and I'm not the expert. So that turning the tables of the community is now the expert that's teaching me of where I can address the system and put in those different levers. And so if we can teach our whether it's our students or if we're doing trainings, we have to make sure that we put the onus back on the locally led leaders, and that we're supporting and listening to them and embracing that co-creation and knowledge that's coming from there. I think if we pull those together, and part of those are part of the inner competencies that we need to be teaching, is to make sure that we are approaching our courses or programs with that deep listening, that we understand and empathize with those that we're engaging with. We see things from a different lens, we're co-creating, and then we're persistent in pursuing that systems level change.
Yeah, anyone want to pick that up?
Okay. Okay, so I'm looking at the Q&A thread, and it's oh, wait a minute, ask a question. No. I'm looking on the Hoover site because Antje said she's posted there, and I don't see
Yeah.
the questions there. So help,
Well,
what's going on?
that's okay. Well, you know, Marilyn, now that I have you on the screen, I know you've done quite a bit of work on the concept of transformative learning, and I think that relates well to what Debbie and Jane were just describing in terms of what distinguishes systems education from, say, you know, conventional technical education or analytical skills development. And this idea that, you know, that we're teaching people to make them more inclusive and discriminating and reflective and open and emotionally capable of engaging in change sounds very ambitious and even risky. So, I mean, in your experience, how do you go about doing that kind of thing? How do you support students or professionals in transformative learning? What's your experience in thinking about that as an actual pedagogy as opposed to more of a description of a life experience? How do you sustain those kinds of skills and capacities?
That's a big one. I think for me, a general answer is that when it comes to transformation and transformative learning, what we can do as educators and as facilitators is we can open doors, but we can't make people walk through them. And I think it's one of the things we've discussed a lot, for example, in tracks and in previous project groups, is how do you know that it worked? You have this course for transformative learning, and it's great that you did this follow-up, Jane, with people who've done long-term immersive had immersive experiences. How do you know that it works if you give a workshop, for example, a few days, which I'll be doing this week, later this week? How do you know it worked? And the answer really is you don't, unless people actually tell you. And I think all of us know that transformation itself is instantaneous. It happens like that. Suddenly, you see things differently, and you can't unsee them. So that's kind of the basis of transformation. But it may not happen when I would like it to happen as an educator or a facilitator. It may happen next week or next year, or even I had somebody contact me recently and say, you know, that workshop you gave 15 years ago? No. Well, it changed my life now. So we need to have faith that what we're doing, opening doors, enables enough people to move through those doors, but it has to be at times that suit them. And so it's an act of faith. It really is. Yeah. How does that sound to the rest of you? Am I?
Absolutely, actually. I'd love to jump into that because a follow-up study from the one I presented briefly was looking at what transforms, and part of that, you know, is it ongoing? Like, does it transform and kind of shift back? And a lot of our graduates would say, not a lot, but some would say, you know, I had this amazing experience. It was wonderful. And I sensed into what it was like to live in a different way. You know, there was that lived experience of how I would like to do things. But then I went back to the real world, or left the bubble. And, you know, that challenge of then trying to bring it with you into a new reality. And I mean, I can speak for myself. I feel like I personally experienced something within my year of MSLS that I've been aiming to recreate ever after in my life, and recreate for others, to give people a taster of what's possible, of what things could look like if we were to live a little bit more different and more sustainable.
It's about building bridges also. We found that essential in our workshops, that even if it's just 2 or 3 days, and even more if it's 10 months. I haven't had that privilege except for working with your course, Jane, but before your time. But it's so important before the end to build a bridge back to daily life. We often invite people to imagine that they're back in their normal environment and to create some kind of event, imaginary event that will enable them to root what they're experiencing now with what's going on when they get back. And there are many different ways of doing this, but it's something that we use a great deal in our educational programs. I think we're getting quite a few questions. I love the one about how many mice make a horse.
Yes, could you please answer that? We would love to know.
Well, I think actually one mouse can do as much as a horse, but we want lots of them, yeah. So I think probably we could even say one mouse can do as much as a horse, but it does it more discreetly.
The question that added, what Giles added onto that question is, he said that are the radical mind shifts preferable to the systems transformations? I thought that was an intriguing question, because radical mind, sometimes we do have these radical mind shifts in education, because they come in with one set of values and expectations, but they leave with something completely different.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's part of the nature of transformative learning, is that it's not what you expected it would be.
Yeah, I see a comment from Stacy I'm going to read in the chat. She said she, as a student and change agent, self-understanding and awareness is a key first step toward transformation, but it's really, really hard. At the end of my first year doing this through our master's program, she writes, several of my peers burned out, their anxiety levels heightened. This self-transformations journey is not for the faint of heart. How does that land with you all?
That's interesting.
I think there's a big lesson here for us. It's partly what I said earlier about opening doors, but not pushing people through them. And it sounds as though there has been some attempt to push people through, which I know happens sometimes. But there's also the question that we're coming up against more and more, which is that as universities and schools, even grade schools and so on, other and non-formal learning arenas begin to be more anxious about teaching, for example, climate change, and they're pushing it on. And I went to one university which puts as a requirement for all new students that they have to do a basic course in sustainable development and the SDGs. And one result was that students started on enrolling because they were so filled with despair. And in fact, we have another project starting in September, where we're going to be looking at how do you teach things like climate without driving pupils or students to the brink of suicide. I mean, that's not the balance between hope and disappointment that we need. And I think that's being very much ignored, that balance. And when that balance is ignored, we get the kind of effect that Stacey is talking about.
In that piece of, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Piece of when we're teaching that positivity, that when we have that negativity of the SDGs will not be achieved, we're not on progress, we're not going to be able to do this, the doom and gloom, the news kind of side of things, versus the positive feeling that control from the young people that you can affect change, that I can make a difference, and that will help them be prepared for this world that's going to be ever changing, but a world that they have some control of making an impact on.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to speak to this too. I think that's the challenges of this kind of education, or the challenges of what we're trying to do in the world. And I know we're talking systems education. I'm very much framing it in sustainability, which is, the environmental stuff / climate change, the things that we're seeing in the world. You can't be with that content. In fact, social sustainability, you can't be with that content and not be affected emotionally and well, I mean, it's very hard to, maybe some people can, and some people have to disassociate in order just to kind of keep doing what they're doing. But the kind of education that I think all of us are talking about invites the whole human being into the room. Like, we're not just talking about concepts. Oh, I see the world differently. Now I understand how to do a new maths equation. We're understanding concepts that are existential and huge and challenging. And I think that is a real challenge of the work we're doing from the students' perspective, because a lot of them around this stuff are going to be affected. From the staff's perspective, because it's quite challenging as a staff member holding the journey of people going through transformation for sustainability, when, you know, it's like, oh my God, you know, what's happening? And also the challenges institutionally, because the institutions that we have, they're not moving fast enough, and they don't also, I'm talking about higher education institutions, they're not geared to do the kind of education that's needed for sustainability leadership. So, you know, there's all these different challenges that we have in doing this kind of education. And I think what Stacey's talking about, absolutely, that's there. And I also think from when I started discovering this thing called sustainability in the early noughties, you know, 2000s, I'm like, wow, my frustration was that no one else could see that there was a problem. Like, I was in Australia where climate change didn't exist, you know, and I'm like, oh my God. So for me, going to Sweden and studying this master's program, I was with the tribe. Finally, people were talking about the fact that things don't work. We're now 2022, 23, it's very different. Everyone knows there's problems. And so if we kind of go in hard, like we used to 15 years ago, with the look at all the problems and look at how they're connected and look at how challenging it is, students can have wig outs with that because they already know it's hard. I just think that the time, you know, time is making it even more challenging to do this work.
I'm going to bring in the question from Rafaela. She talked about thinking about transformations that universities have to go through and the learning to be transformative for both students and the staff. And there was an earlier question too about the staff, is how do we make them want to be engaged in this and go through a program that engages the staff and educators, not just the students. She talked about at the Shoemaker College, their MSLS offered a deeper reflection space and nourishment that they want to reproduce in the mainstream settings. Can you guys offer some insights on the future of mainstream universities and the changes that are necessary there to do this work?
Can I quickly jump into that one? Just 'cause it does connect in with MSLS. I think it's a fantastic question. And I think, Rafaela, thank you. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is, I don't want to be, I mean, part of me is like, I don't know that it's possible, because I've taught in higher education in Australia and I've taught higher education in Sweden, and the resourcing, the staff resourcing to do this kind of work is huge. And I think what you also see, not just in higher education institutions, but in let's go with organizations trying to do this work in the world, there can be a lot of reliance on volunteer labor, you know, the staff, the facilitators that will hold the process, and we do it because we care and all of these things. But, you know, we also need to have homes and food to eat. So I really think there is this resourcing of this work that is a challenge, and to go to a university that doesn't have this kind of program and say, you know, let's do it, but you're going to need to actually have a key number of staff that can work collaboratively to hold a group, you know, that would be a hard sell. I'm sure it's possible. And at the same time, the reason I talked about that creativity project is because I see that that's something that, and it kind of is also speaking to maybe a couple of the other questions I saw in here. For me, it's a tiny little project, a pedagogy that I see makes big differences, little transformative differences in students that doesn't require much more from a staff resourcing perspective. So that's why I offer these two different examples of MSLS, which is kind of all embodied intensive live on an island, and then a creativity in action project that anyone could take and adapt to their own place.
To answer respond to your question, Debbie, I think there is a risk that the academic community has outlived itself. It's making itself obsolete. Now, there are some very honorable exceptions, But what we see is that there is partly there's an expectation on the part of students that if I go to a university, I will get a job. So to be fit for employment is a huge expectation of many students. And in order to live up to that, many academic institutions and the administrations and the top management feel they have to offer something that is very concrete and very tangible, like plumbing. No, not plumbing, but you know what I mean. Something that you can, and to talk about transformation or transformative learning goes against the grain for them. That's one of the reasons the Trojan mice are so important, because there are lots and lots of professors and associate professors and lecturers out there who are doing stuff like Jane, which the administration would not necessarily approve of if they were really sure of what they were doing. It's one way of doing it. But I think we have to face the fact that in a certain sense, academic, both research and education, has run into a couple of dead ends, and it hasn't quite woken up to that yet. So it's a huge challenge. Yeah.
And I think when we go back to those of us, when you go back, and of course I spent 20 years in higher education, and when I go back to the role of education is to have a positive contribution to the world, and to do that through our young people and then in our communities. So if we look back at what our premise of our university is, we should be doing this important work. We should be having these lifelong shifts in not only the lives of our students, but in the communities in which our universities are housed. And if we don't go back to that and do the societal change, then are we going to be sustainable over time? Because there's going to be other programs and opportunities that pop up that might be better warranted than your traditional 4-year education, which would send a few for new loops, trying to figure out how to get the students in the seats versus our core mission is to prepare them for this changing world.
I see there are lots of questions in here that I finally managed to get up on my screen. Thank you.
Just a quick response to that. I think that we're touching in now with part of our societal paradigms that are affecting our ability to do this work, which is, what is the role of higher education and who should be paying for it, right? And I've got these two different experiences, one in Australia and one in Sweden. And, in Sweden, higher education, when I did my first master's, it was free for everyone. Higher education in Sweden was free because we want to build an educated society for the future. My other home being Australia, we have perfected the commodification of education. We sell our degrees, and we see education and higher education as a way to make money. And our universities are businesses, and they are huge businesses. And, sure, there are benefits with that, absolutely. But what's missing for me is the awareness that, the higher education has a role to play in building a healthy democratic society. When you're just selling education, it's hard to make your values align with that.
And I want to bring in, sorry, I'll let you go. Let me bring in one more thing.
No, go ahead.
So AACSB is the big accrediting body for business schools around the world. And literally in June of this year, social impact is a key accreditation criteria. So when you look at the business school and you got finance and accounting and management and marketing, and it's about going corporate, they have to now prove, to continue accreditation, they're making societal impact. It blows my mind that the major accreditation body is saying we expect this from our universities, and they're doing so much training and preparation for university deans and educators to make that happen. Thank you for the hearts. Back to you, Bruce.
Yeah, I'm struck by the distinction between programs like the one that Jane is in, and social entrepreneurship programs, which I think is more associated with business schools and professional education. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, how do you operate in a setting like that if you have a much broader educational mission, if you're trying to pursue ideas about personal change and transformative experiences, and trying to acquaint people with deep systemic challenges, if they're practical orientation is to get a business degree and succeed in business. It just seems more challenging to pursue systems education when you're not operating with so-called, the converted. We in the transformations community has a catalog of systems education programs, and the breadth from experiential wilderness-based programs with immersions to professional programs where they're trying to give people marketable skills is quite broad. I wonder if you can comment on that.
I will say this. It's actually a fallacy to think that it's coming from the business schools, because in reality, it's actually coming from outside the business schools. So one of our researches that we did, and I want to say the last one was 2018, but we were seeing a much higher percentage that were coming beyond business schools. So almost 40% of social entrepreneurship courses were in non-business departments. And it's getting even better in our latest work. We also see from like the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor that looks at 51 economies across the world, 80% of the social entrepreneurs are emphasizing the social impact in their operations. They're seeing the value of that. So as we're transforming higher education, transforming entrepreneurs and other actors in this space, can we get more of this balanced approach to doing business and doing good, as opposed to just this economic impact and making money, but having the social and environmental piece tied into that as well. So yeah, I just want to bring that up in the sense of that it isn't actually, my sense at this point, we're probably equal, business schools being teaching this and non-business schools, because it is being sought after from across the campus communities.
Great. I guess I can't see any of the Q&A, unfortunately. So if you see a question in there that grips you, grab it and share it with us, panelists.
I just wanted to add to what Debbie said, which is that increasingly companies, especially big international companies, are announcing that they don't take academic qualifications into account when recruiting. Whether it's
going to be new.
So, and a little addendum to what I said earlier about being where the students or the participants are. Speaking as a psychologist, it's very easy to believe that you know what's good for people. At least a lot of schools of psychology teach that. And we've noticed in another project that we've been running, which is about empowering vulnerable people to take more space in society. We studied a whole bunch of self-empowerment programs, apps, different things, and almost without exception, they were peddling a particular model that this is, if you think or behave like this or feel like this, then you're on the right track. This is good. And if you don't, it's bad. And so we spent a lot of time, we spent 3 years on this project, developing self-study, self-empowerment materials that build on what the participant thinks is good for them, and not what some theoretician says should be the case. And I think, okay, so that's psychology, that happens to be my own discipline, but I'm sure there's scope for that in so many different areas to bring out what the participants themselves long for, dream of, and then we will get a better chance of getting past this block of they're trying to push me into something that I'm not ready for. Yeah, I just wanted to add that because it's been very important for me the last few years in this project. Yeah.
Bruce, did you say you don't see the Q&A?
Unfortunately not.
Okay, so maybe we could be mindful just to bring some of these questions in. I can start at the top, maybe with Angie. How to start engaging the teaching staff into a personal transformation process without making it look like this way and frame it like continuous professional development. I can speak to that, Angie. This is outside of the higher education institution environment. We recently did some training for a large multinational company. So I understand you're asking about teaching staff, but bear with me. A large multinational company, and we were working with their HR team in order to do a professional development. So the HR team have been rolling out leadership training throughout the organization. And we came in as like part of that, doing a sustainability leadership training, train the trainer for the HR team to then go and roll out throughout the whole organization. So I just think that it was interesting for us to have to frame a lot of what we do in different language, because, new management, shall we say, values sustainability less than previous management. So how do you frame kind of sustainability and leadership in a different language for a multinational professional development training? Language, I think, is key. That's my answer. Like, what's the language that you need to speak to put the concepts into a different language? I think it's probably your Trojan mice kind of thing, but yeah, I can't idea.
Let me go ahead.
No, I think the question about how crucial is nature connectedness in the transformative process, I wanted to ask you two to answer that question with Juella. Jane or Marilyn?
I can quickly go. I think I had a really interesting experience in my first master's in Karlskrona. We co-deliver our theses, and I was designing one with two other friends, one from Sweden and one from Mexico. And we were designing this learning journey and basing it loosely on the artist's way. And, we had all of these different exercises for people to develop their sustainability leadership. And one of them was to go out into nature, blah, 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 blah. And my friend from Mexico, she's like, but that's not going to be possible for my friends. Like, she came from a part of Mexico City where I just had this assumption coming from Australia and living in Sweden. Wow. You just walk down the road to the local park, or you just walk out the front and there's a tree there. And she was just like, there might be stars occasionally. And that for me that stayed with me. But I don't know the answer, but just that's my response to that question.
Yeah. Yes, I think, well, Julia, I think in response to your question, the important thing is that we learn to see nature, whatever that means, as something that we are part of and not something external to ourselves. I used to give a course in international project management, and it became clear that for many participants from many parts of the world, what was outdoors, if by that we mean nature, was inherently hostile. It was either, you couldn't, so you couldn't use that as part of your training experience. You had to engage some other senses and some other ways of viewing us as a part of nature. And I think that's the crucial bit.
We have about 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure we had time to kind of take it up a level and think about the field of systems education in the sense of what can we do to think about how to make it a stronger, more effective, more far-reaching opportunity. And so perhaps let's start off by asking, how do we cultivate systems change educators? What does it take to and how do they differ from, say, ordinary university educators in those outmoded institutions you were referring to earlier, Marilyn? Is this a different kind of expertise to be a systems change educator than to be a conventional educator? And if so, how do we cultivate that difference?
I can offer.
Yeah.
I think the framing I'd like to put to the words just around language would perhaps be systems change educator. I see us as facilitators of change, and like that opening of doors. I like that metaphor, Marilyn. I see that what we do, whether it's in a higher education institution or any organization or a workplace and not a formal environment, kind of, I guess the intention is to open a door that another might kind of walk through and see the world a little bit differently. That work is, I'm going to go with, can be really challenging because, often when you read Education for Sustainable Development, it's written like there's an assumption that everyone wants it, like everyone wants it, the world needs it. But there are a lot of people out there that don't necessarily want it, need it, and will fight actively against it. And I think that's one of the questions that Bruce was mentioning. I think that there's that reality as well. I don't know that I answered it, but their thoughts.
One thing I'd like to contribute here is the importance of the will to personal transformation of the educator or the facilitator. I mean, I could teach the Swedish language in a way that was empowering or disempowering, depending on who I am and how I relate to my participants. So we're back to the whole question of relationships. So if we can support a generation of educators to feel comfortable with the idea of a journey of unlearning, of who I am today is not necessarily who I am. Essentially, I'm on a journey and I'm willing to invite my participants, my students, to join me on that journey. I think that's absolutely key. And it doesn't matter what you're teaching. It really, really doesn't matter what you're teaching. I have a friend in university who teaches how to write a scientific paper for publication. And she does it in a way that empowers the students she works with one-on-one. Not by being the expert on scientific papers, which she is, or on language, which she is, but by being who she is. Yeah. So that will, okay, I'm a psychologist. Give me a bit of rope here.
I did also, just want to respond to that. I know that, I know, Debbie, you were talking about the inner development goals. I think, is that, yeah? Mm-hmm. There's also another paper that I've been part of publishing. I'm going to put in the link. It's the intrapersonal capacities for sustainability leadership. So within that same sense of what is the inner work, like the who and how do we have to, what is it? What's this inner work of sustainability leadership? What is it that we need to start to develop in order to be able to be these facilitators of change in the world? So this paper looks at that. Yeah, there you go, direct link.
Thanks, Jane. That's great to have. I wonder what we could, as a field, if we're thinking about field building, and I know that's a big concern of yours, Debbie, in the sense that that's Catalyst's mission. What can we do to build and strengthen the field of systems education? And I think of it also in terms of what can the transformations community do to better support systems educators and the extension of the field and broadening the availability and impact of the programs and the opportunities we want to offer. Debbie, you want to dig in on that?
I would love to see us have some program that we bring in for the educators, because I think a lot of times, we're at academic conferences and it's about research and publishing, but to have those transformative experiences. And where I was in 2003, I started at Brio College, and Greg Dees, who's like the father of social entrepreneurship education, and Greg's actually helped to design our program model. And had I not had that experience with him, I wouldn't have been transformed. And being at Brio College, which is a very unique university. And so if there's not that environment where you're with these like-minded people, you don't get that experience. I challenge you, Bruce, then in this transformations community, is there a track or a series specific for educators? Because once we help us transform ourselves and our learnings, and I want to spend space with both of you, is then we are better at preparing that next generation of change makers. So having more of those initiatives, I think, would be super helpful. I want to make another point. It's Denise Crossan. She's at Swarthmore College, and they're actually putting together university-wide systems transformation initiative to transform the whole university. And once I think if they adopt it, the board of trustees adopt it, it'll be interesting to see how the university shifts because of that initiative.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Finding a way to make the institutions that we want to embed these programs in more receptive and more accepting of the untraditional nature of these programs. Jane, that sounds like something you've wrestled with, especially with being in a university that says technical in the title. You know, how do you find a happy home for that, and how might we seek to alter the field of higher education and educational institutions to make these kinds of programs more acceptable to them?
Yes, and I also see Bruce Hull's question at the last one of the Q&A, just to bring that in, which is connected to that, I think. Bruce, how is the increasing political polarization and tribalization impacting your teaching, administration of systems change and systems transformation? I thought that was an interesting question for anyone.
Yeah, that sort of supercharges the concern, not just institutional resistance, but the impacts of the polarized political environment make it very difficult to pursue these kinds of programs, I would assume. Have any of you encountered that kind of resistance, and how have you responded to it?
I should say that in Sweden, our current government has basically wiped out all funding for teaching and researching sustainable development, and has replaced it by funding for developing nuclear power. So yes, that is a gross exaggeration, but I like exaggerating. But no, it's not that gross. It really is, and they have reduced. They have gone in and affected the tenure of certain positions in academia quite in a way that's never been done before. So it's definitely a very strong influence.
Are there ways we can push back? We can speak with a common voice. We can promote our work under that kind of pressure.
The only thing that I can think of doing is finding other ways for the great people who are losing their jobs now to continue to educate outside of the system, or possibly in other parts of the system, or possibly even outside of Sweden. It is, yeah. And I hope that the program in Karlskrona will not be affected, but I know that you have a lot of income from students who actually pay for participation, which makes you a little less vulnerable than some of the others. But yeah, I know.
I feel like we need, and by we, I mean kind of society, we need a new narrative of what education is, because we buy into education being for jobs and professions that already exist. And as if there's a predicted future, as if there's one future, and you come into the university and you buy your degree and then you come out with this thing. But I guess it's part of that hope and agency. We don't know what the future's going to be. There are a million possible futures. So this education for possible futures, not education for the future. I feel like there's a shift of narrative that's needed. I feel like we need to be really vocal about the role of education in a society, the kind of society that we want to live in, and the value of that. And the freedom of that, because in Australia, I've seen arts degrees become pulled away. Who needs a philosophy degree? We need to teach people to dig stuff out of the ground, or whatever else we need to do to keep the economic engines flowing. moving. I just think we need a new story, and we need new imaginings, and or old imaginings. Build
I'd
on.
like to, I'd
Yeah.
like to mention, in connection with that, absolutely reinforcing it. Last year we had a small project where we had a PhD student we helped her to find out who are the most avant-garde teachers of economics in universities around the world. And then she interviewed the most, the ones who were profiled. And one thing that emerged, those of us who was supporting her, we noticed very quickly that when they talked about what they taught, none of them taught about, wait for it, money. So we had to go back and re-interview them and say, what do you teach your students about money? And their response was, we don't, because we don't know, because we don't know what money is.
Awesome.
Well, but they took it as a given. It's an assumption. It's never challenged. It's not a topic for transformative learning. What is money? What could money be? What role does it play in our futures? So, and I thought that was so illustrative of what is going on in academia today that I didn't quite despair, but I started. So we have a new project coming up. Watch this space.
Nice.
But also there was a question earlier on the Q&A, and I typed a response to it, and it promptly disappeared, which so I can't remember who wrote it, but it was about what goes on in business. And there's a lovely example of a Trojan horse there that I've used myself, and that is to teach job satisfaction. So how do I teach managers, leaders, whoever, to lead in such a way that they maximize the job satisfaction for everybody? And now that's a Trojan horse, because mouse, that's a mouse. So because job satisfaction, right, but teaching it the way I teach it or write about it opens up things for people to say, oh, I never thought of that. Maybe, could it be? I actually published an article about it recently that I'll put in the chat just in case anybody's interested. It was published by a leadership magazine called Developing Leaders. But I think we're going to be looking for these. I'm looking for mice all over the place. Yeah.
Thanks, Marilyn. So we're drawing near the end of our time together, and I would be remiss as the director of an organization if I didn't take the opportunity to hawk my wares. And so I'm going to show you all, not bad, I'm going to show you all a database that we created in the transformations community. While I'm sharing this, think of a last remark each of you would like to share, because I'll come back to each of the panelists in a moment. I want to show you a database that our community has created of systems education programs. And and the idea that we have, I'm going to, hopefully this will get us there. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so the idea we have is that we are all sort of separate programs, all advertising and competing for students. And it's really hard to find a place where students can sort out all the different kinds of programs that are available out there and find the ones that are best suitable for them. And so this is sort of a neutral ground where we put up information about all the world's systems education programs. We have 120 programs in here right now. And then we have all these filters on the left where a student can select the length, the cost, the location, whether it's degree granting or not, the program type, and then sort out and then reach out to the organization or the program they want. And our idea is, how can we build the field as a whole, since that's something that no one has taken on as their mission. So we want to do more things like that for the field of systems education that would benefit everyone, that would make all ships rise. So if folks have ideas or initiatives they want to partner with us, we're very open to that. And I love the idea of creating communities of practice that you mentioned earlier, Marilyn, as well. Creating opportunities, forums where we can share ideas and identify things that we can pursue of collective interest. So do check out our catalog, and if your program's not in there, please send us your information and we'll add you to it. And that said, I want to go back to each panelist for a final word. So who would like to begin? Debbie, you're on my screen. Is it fair to ask you first?
I think for us, I'm really making sure that we continue this important work, and that we're passionate about this, or we wouldn't be in this space. But to help bring in others into the community, to help them see things with a different lens, and to look beyond just not for those in traditional education, to look beyond just educating our students, but educating our communities and our universities as well. So those opportunities to expand. And a couple of the Q&A questions talked about that is, how do we engage our peers? How do we get our universities? And trying to get more educators in our spaces with us so that they're affecting transformative change in their students and in their communities as well.
Thanks, Debbie. Marilyn, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I'd like to say that we're going to continue this path of projects which are run according to action research. And we are absolutely in favor of collaboration. We welcome anybody who wants to join us in this exploration of what might be possible, even the impossible. Making the impossible possible. Yes.
I think of Legacy 17 and of course Catalyst as being field builders as well. So really admire your work. Love to collaborate with you in the future. Jane, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to be part of this. I really think that these conversations and meeting each other are so useful in helping to build the social fabric of what we're trying to do, because I think all change happens between people, within people, and around that. And audience, thank you for your questions. And just so you know that we had vision to have more of a breakout room, but technology, we're still learning. We're still learning. But, as we go, I just think, our ability to interact and stay connected across the globe. I mean, Bruce, this is an amazing thing that you've created, a conference that does span across the globe and allow people to be in person and online. I think it's wonderful. So more of this, I think, is great. Okay.
Thanks, Jane. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we've taken on a lot with this technology platform, the global integration, the 3 different in-person locations, the online. The idea is we're niche innovating and in a safe fail environment and trying out. So we'd love your feedback on what works, what doesn't work, what should we try again, what should we try differently. This is all an experiment for us in creating global community, and we want to be your partners in this. So thanks to our panelists for your fantastic conversation. It's dynamic and really engaging. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for coming, and we'll work on that breakout capacity so we'll involve you more effectively next time around. And I look forward to seeing you at more sessions. The conference continues. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks also from my side.
I'm sorry, I won't be at most of the sessions. Just to let you know, I'm giving face-to-face workshops most of the rest of the week. But
well, the nice thing is they're all recorded. So if there's any that interest you, you can pull them up afterwards. We'll send you all the links.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everyone.